there's this, everybody knows you and you don't know them. So you grow up with a context of being looked at, and you have an understanding internally that your life isn't just yours, and that you are being watched, and there's a narrative around your family.
Welcome to the Shepherds Podcast, a podcast by pastors for pastors, designed to be a communal space where relationships and resources bring refreshing and renewal to those who shepherd and lead congregations. Connect with us and check out more episodes and resources at theshepherdsnetwork.com.
Welcome back to the Shepherds Network podcast. It is great to have you with us. This is a podcast by shepherds for shepherds of the local church. And today is a really exciting moment for me because I'm going to be having a conversation and interviewing my son, Jordan Carter, about what it's like to be a son in the ministry, not just as a young person growing up in the church, but now to work in a church with your family. Mm-hmm. And some of you, I know, have that dynamic going on. You're working in family relationships in a church, even if you're not a senior pastor working with a child, a son or daughter. You might be working together in the ministry as husband and wife or siblings. Mm-hmm. And there are complications that come with ministry life, period. But when you add family and ministry together, it can be really exciting and challenging. So we're going to have this conversation, and mm-hmm. I'm going to ask my son Jordan, who is an expert by virtue of having lived this, mm-hmm. To give us his wisdom. So Jordan, thank you for being with us today. This is awesome.
It's so good to be here. I'm very excited to have this conversation.
Yeah. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk a little bit about starting back with our relationship as it relates to church and family. Mm-hmm. Now, whenever you have a pastor that has children and they're being raised in the church, mm-hmm. it's a unique dynamic, and we'll talk about that.
Yep.
But we had an especially unusual situation, whereas we didn't just assume a church, we gave birth to a church. We mm-hmm. planted a church. And Lisa was 9 months pregnant, your mom, mm-hmm. and she went into labor for you during our very first church service.
Yes. So the legend goes.
That's right, and it's true. And you were born just about 24 hours after our first church service. So you literally have come up with a ministry.
That's right. Yep.
Yes. And we started, of course, in our living room with mm-hmm. A handful of people, and the ministry grew. It grew fast, and you grew. And you got to watch as a child firsthand all of the dynamics of pastoring. And of course, God's blessed us with a larger congregation. And mm-hmm. so there's the dynamics of that. Mm-hmm. And so just talk to me a little bit about what it was like to grow up in the spotlight of the ministry.
Well, there's many aspects to talk about. I think one of the most interesting elements, and I see it in my son, now, since I'm a pastor now, and I am raising my son in a ministry where people know him. And I think when I see him and how he walks, I begin to see a reflection of what it was like for me. And you didn't have that experience in the same way that I had, because you were the start, you were the founder, right? So I had a pioneer-like experience as a child of a ministry that's growing. And when I watch it in my son, one of the unique elements is that there's this, everybody knows you and you don't know them. So you grow up with a context of being looked at, and you have an understanding internally that your life isn't just yours, and that you are being watched, and there's a narrative around your family that's bigger than just you, or maybe all of your friends and other people that you know.
Right. So the average family,
it's just different.
You've got your family, you've
mm-hmm.
got your friends at school, they've got friends, right?
Yeah.
But they're not.
Yeah. There's not a public persona that the family has that is, and I'm sure other families experience this, like who are politicians or other people, where they have public parents. But for me, being known and being from a young age creates an interesting dynamic within yourself. You just kind of expect that people are going to befriend you always, and then you begin to develop a private inner world and then this external world, and there's there can be a division between who am I versus who am I to everybody else from a time that you're young. So you kind of develop this, where am I here, where am I there, and what do I need to be for these people in order for them to feel comfortable.
So you mentioned something a minute ago. I just want you to expand on that a little bit, because I think all pastors will relate to this to a certain level. But there are people that listen and watch the podcast that are not like in full-time ministry. We would call them civilians, right?
Yeah.
They don't, and you can't understand the life that we live unless you live it, right? It's really unique. And so one of the dynamics is that you mentioned you can be out in public at Target or State Fair or anywhere, and people will come up to you and talk to you like they know you, and you have no idea who they are.
Yeah, well, I watched, and also we had to share you guys with everybody. So our parents are more than just our parents that, do this or that. When we were out, we would be together as a family, but somebody would come up to you and want to talk to you. And by the nature of ministry, it's not like they just want to take a photo with you or something. They want to talk about their life with you. They get an opportunity to have their shepherd speak to them or whatever. And so many times growing up, I remember we tell the story all the time where in the early days, you would have all these dinners and with pastoral meetings with people. And I would be in the restaurant booth as a kid with my toys, just playing, watching you and mom minister to somebody. But I mean, I wasn't watching. You told me I had to basically
Told you to tune out.
Tune out. That's right. That was the word. Tune it out. So I'd go in my own little world and play. But knowing that, this wasn't a dinner for us. This was a dinner for this person and them. Right. I get to be a party. I'm party to it, but I'm not. It's not really for me.
You had to share your life with hundreds of people, thousands actually over the years, that the average person doesn't have to do. There's a burden on you as a child of a pastor that is.
Yeah. And we get a front row seat to all the challenging aspects of ministry when you're pioneering and watching it. Like I watched, which creates interesting agreements inside of yourself as a child of that, right?
Talk about that.
Yeah, I watched you guys go through people who promised the world and then left. A lot of departures, I would say. That was a major theme. If I'm looking back, that was a major theme that I remember thinking about a lot. Is like, wow, they're leaving. Where are they going? Or they're mad. Why are they mad? I don't know these things. I'm just a kid.
And we wouldn't give you the details because it wouldn't be appropriate to tell you.
Me and my brothers, if they were like really high profile, me and my brothers would try to patchwork together the story. So if you're a pastor's kid, you're PK, you understand this. If you have siblings, you see somebody of high profile, something happened, and you're like, wait a minute, something's up. And so me and my brothers would try to figure it out with all the things that we knew. But yeah, we watched you guys go through a lot, go through building campaigns and the stresses of that, and people, that you helped immensely get mad for some reason and leave, or blame you for, what in my estimation was really their problem. I watched you guys went through a lot of pressures and a lot of different things that I just got to witness as a kid. And me being the oldest, I saw a lot of the earlier stuff more than my brothers did.
Right.
So when the church was in some really crucial key moments, I was old enough to remember it. And so witnessing that and then saying what I won't do and what I will do based off of what I see my parents go through, and how they act or don't act is an interesting. It produces interesting results when you're a young adult.
So you said something about being raised in, we sometimes call it the fishbowl, right? So you have your family.
Yep.
And we tried to really protect our family life and make it a fun, dynamic place, right? But when you're in public, especially in central New York where we live, there's always the knowledge that you might be interacting with somebody that knows you, right?
Yep.
And they may not tell you that they know you until you pay for the item and they say, here you are, pastor.
Yeah.
Or they call you by your name and you're like, oh, they know me. How do I know them?
Or they give you a look. Someone looking at you and you're like, oh, that's a look that they know me. I don't know who they are. So I have to.
And folks think, that's really cool to be known, but it really is. It does a number on you psychologically because you don't have any anonymity. You can't be certain.
And you're known in a way that isn't just you're famous for doing a cool movie. You're known for being a caretaker and being a man of wisdom.
Yeah.
And so now I experience this today, right? I'm known more now because I'm up more and I get to be a part of this incredible platform. But there's also like this sense that people need from you. And then there's, in me, sometimes this internal thing that says, "Man, I hope I can give them what they need. I'm going to act like I can because that's what they need from me. But I'm not perfect either. And I'm going through whatever I'm going through, So so it really does create almost like a split sometimes in who you are. Because you are what you need to be for the sake of the sheep that need you in that way. And then you have your own life that you have to deal with and your own unique elements and ways and stuff. And so where does that belong? And how do you find who you are? What does who you are really mean? It becomes confusing.
There's something else that I want you to talk about.
Yeah.
There's also the dynamic of church people's expectations of you and your behavior.
Yeah.
So you really can't be like a normal kid because people expect you the pastor's kid.
You should be, but yeah, it's hard to be.
It's hard to be. And then sometimes people, what are some of the things that you experience? I mean, you've shared some of it with me. But
because I remember it made you guys really upset when I'd share these things with you guys. There's an expectation sometimes that you should behave a certain way or be different than, like I remember hearing explicitly said, not just implicitly, but like, hey, you shouldn't do that. You're a pastor's kid. Like it's different for you. And I'm like, but I'm just a kid. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
we're not talking about like sin. It's just
no, nothing crazy. Just whether it was. I remember I got really mad at school because I thought a teacher thought I said something and I was joking around. I was just being a kid, messing around. And she thought I meant it in a certain way that I didn't mean it. But she was convinced I was like meaning it a certain way. So she was accusing me of these things and it wasn't fully true. And I was getting really, really upset. And she said, you have an anger problem. You shouldn't have that. You're a pastor's kid.
So you weren't allowed to have the feeling.
I was in like 6th grade, 7th grade. Yeah. And so I started to that's when I got really angry. And then I said to myself, well, I guess I can't feel this. I guess this is just what I'm born in. I can't, this range of emotion isn't for me.
Right.
I can't do that, which I had to then deal with much later and integrate that better. But yeah, there's an expectation for you to be better or do this or that. So that's where finding your identity and like who you are is really challenging because you're respected because of who your family is and because your family are caretakers. They're not just famous for making good entertainment. They're known for being people with answers, people with wisdom, people that know the scripture. And so it just creates an interesting dynamic between how you're viewed from the outside, whether perceived or whether real, and then how you then decide to view yourself and build your own identity and who you decide to be from that childhood experience coming up.
Well, it's no secret that there's a running joke the world knows that pastors' kids grow up to be the most rebellious and kind of, because growing up in that environment, whether it's a Methodist church or it's a Lutheran church or it's a Pentecostal church or a Baptist church, these are the dynamics. And one of the things you shared with me growing up was people would come up to you in church and not just tell you what you should or shouldn't do, but they would have a prophetic word for you.
Oh yeah, we're charismatic, so we got
we're
all
charismatic.
Of that stuff.
We believe in prophecy. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so we get words all the time, or from different people, and they're good meaning. That's the thing. So I just learned to stand there and just receive it. And you taught me, so receive it, be nice about it. Maybe my brothers didn't receive it as kindly sometimes.
What kinds of things would people say to you?
Well, I don't know. There's so many different things, like I have a word for you that you're going to be this or that, or you're going to be a pastor, you're going to be this, and so sometimes it feels like projection. And so when you get it that often, and you get some things that's like a word of knowledge, or someone says something about you, and it's like kind of true, but it's also you kind of know that too. And I'm a pretty pragmatic guy, so I'm like I want it to be really true. I don't want to just be like
good guessing.
It's true, I want it to actually be like I want it to be evidence for its truth, and so It was sometimes really challenging to hear those things. I just learned to take them on. What makes it really hard now is knowing that there's a real authentic version of that, and that a lot of these people were real and authentic to what they knew. And so to not get rid of it all because of some people's, excitement or projection or whatever,
right.
But to say, okay, no, there is reality to this. How do I integrate that into my journey, into my walk, into my spiritual life?
I think one of the things that we tried to do, and I think this is important for pastors that are raising families in the church, young families, is you need to teach your congregation how to interact with your children. And you need to tell your congregation that they are kids, and you need to let them be kids. And they're going to make mistakes just like your kids make.
Yep.
And they don't need to have the pressure of being told, well, don't you know you're a pastor's kid? And I would actually say that to the congregation from time to time.
Which here's the other awkward
Which
part.
didn't really, it didn't change. It didn't change things too much.
I mean,
but
who knows? Maybe for some it did. Some that would have, maybe didn't. But I think what's also unique is because in the church, as a pastor, you're called to a standard of holiness. And so there's this pursuit of holiness, and this is where sometimes legalism can creep its head in or things like that, because you're expected to live to the standard, but we're all human. And so a lot of pastors' kids that I talk to, they feel like they can't actually deal with some of their sin because they can't because of their position or because of their whatever.
They can't be honest about it.
So addiction breeds in secrecy. And so when you have a situation that you're raised up in where to be honest about your humanity is attached to your parents' livelihood, even your parents' humanity is attached to their livelihood too. And so you're raised in a cocoon and sometimes where who can I really talk to about my porn addiction, my whatever issues,
right?
My proclivities for the flesh, whatever that may be,
right?
And so, a good youth pastor can help with that. But even that in my situation was different. You were the youth pastor a lot of that time, and then we had a youth pastor that was there for a little bit, and he was great, and then he left, and then I had another youth pastor, but he was at the very end. So a lot of these things that I have a lot of compassion for pastors' kids because they're raised in an environment where there's high expectations for something they didn't ask for,
right?
And they're raised in a Christian culture, which we should pursue holiness and righteousness, like that's ours, At the same time, we have to have safe places to deal with whatever we're dealing with, and in the context of a ministry family, it can get complicated because if your dad, you're also your pastor. How are you going to talk to him about some of your issues? You can't. It's not the same.
Right.
It's just not. Like, especially when you're growing up, your dad being your pastor is like it's kind of is and it kind of isn't.
Right.
You're a kid.
Right.
They're really the main part. The
your
primary
dad
function is to be
dad.
a dad at that stage in life.
100%.
And so, having a place where you can have healthy containment and talk about some of those things, and I didn't have that to where I needed it. I think when I was growing up, I got that much more later on because I learned how to do that. But it took me a while to actually learn how to attach to people legitimately. I thought I was good at attachment because I could be friends with anybody, but no one really knew me. That was kind of the trick I always had. I could understand people. I had insights into people and how I could tell by their look what they were thinking because I was raised around it. I was raised in a context where that was
intuition was
really,
important.
really important
Reading people.
skill set. Yeah.
Very important.
So, I was raised in an environment like that. And then, growing up, it makes an impact on how you perceive the world and what you do with your life.
So
in that place.
Let's talk about your calling.
Yeah.
So at my mom and I felt that we were not going to teach you from the earliest age that you were called to the ministry. We felt like you guys, our objective for you was if you're good Christian men, you marry great women, and you work hard and live a good life, that's our objective.
Yeah.
Not we're raising preachers. There's some pastors who have a different approach, but we felt like we didn't want to put that on anyone, at least about our own children. So as you grew up in the church, though, it became, you felt the drawing. So talk about that call.
Sure.
How did you come to know your own call
Yeah. It's
in your
complicated.
own right? Okay,
It's complicated.
I want to hear about it. Yep.
Yeah. So I think part of the legend of my story, being born the day the church started, being raised in the church. So there's always been like this myth about the story of my life, that I've always noted. There's a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
It almost feels like there's a narrative that's being written without me having the pen stroke.
Right.
For a lot of my life.
It is what happened, but it is a part of the legend of our church.
It's a story that's told over and over again, and it's told to me over and over again, and all these things. And so for me, when it comes to ministry, what's the challenging part for me is it's not like everyone expected me to be a doctor because my parents were, and I wasn't very good with medicine. I actually had a lot of skill sets. Part of it is when you're raised in an environment where it's happening all the time, you are, certain things are installed in your operating system that make you very good at ministry because you're around it so much. I may have not been in the conversations when you're with all these people,
Yep.
but I heard you guys empathize and lower your voice when you're talking to somebody who's dealing with something. So there's, the apprenticeship is one of the greatest ways to learn anything.
Absolutely.
And I was an apprentice via family my whole life, so I was around it. And so there's these skills that I have, even communication skills, which not everybody has. I'm grateful that God's given me those. I have the gift of gab like you. And so growing up, I could do some of these things, and there was layers of expectation. I felt like sometimes, or like maybe there's a narrative that this was my destiny. And I didn't know what to believe about that. So I thought about, well, I just want to be Indiana Jones when I grow up. That's what I want to be. I want to be an adventurer, And so when we went to Africa, I think when I was 9.
Yep.
Yeah, that's when we were out in Kenya, and we were driving down the road, and I saw the injustice at the time that I perceived as injustice, as people born into a different situation get a different kind of life. And
it's stark.
It's not fair.
It's when you're an American traveling to a developing country like that, and you see it for the first time. It's a little overwhelming.
So there was a sense of injustice about that, and I felt, man, like I want to do something about that. Plus, it scratches an adventure itch in me. I'm in Africa. I'm traveling. I love that. And so growing up as a teenager, I was like, I think I want to do missions. Missions is going to be my, because I think I'm supposed to do ministry because I'm kind of good at this stuff and I like it and I love the Lord. But I think missions will be my version of it, my own version of it. I'm also the oldest, so I'm naturally more dutiful, so I wanted to, there's a part of me, whether it's healthy, unhealthy, that wanted to do right by the family. And so if you're an oldest, I get you. I do. Do right by the family and make sure that you are, you're not going to be the one that messes anything up. That's kind of like one of the things you tell yourself, And so which produced, a standard of holiness in my life that was helpful, maybe coming from the wrong place, but it definitely produced some decent results. Right. And then coming into adulthood, I went to Oral Roberts University and I did the missions program there, and it was amazing, excellent program. And so, Mike, your call to ministry was like God touched these. It's part of the legend, right? You were at a Halloween service that God touched you in the chest and said, "I've called you to the work of my ministry." For me, it wasn't like that, and I think what was difficult for me was comparing myself to you and Mom's legend. Is I think one of the hardest elements of being raised in a ministry family and feeling like, am I called to ministry? I think I may be called to ministry. I mean, I love Jesus. I know this stuff because I've been around it my whole life. But I didn't get it like that. So am I called to ministry? So, because your stories are different. And there's sometimes a level of questioning. Do I have the pen of my life, or is it just laid out before me? Like, who's writing the story here?
Right.
And, so through a number of events in my life, I've really come to the place where I know that I'm called to the ministry. I'm called the shepherd on my own right. But it's taken most of my 20s to figure some of that out.
Yeah.
Of like, I had this other stuff about I love leadership. I love organizational sciences. I love all that kind of stuff.
You have a master's degree in organizational leadership, coaching.
Yeah, I love that stuff, and I love traveling. My undergraduate degree was in international community development, which is basically consulting, needs assessment, things like that. And so, I love those things, but I always had like this pull back, and I was wondering, is the pull back to ministry out of duty, or is it out of calling? And that is confusing. It is very confusing.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in a position like myself, where you're gifted similarly. And when I am preaching, I love it. There's a part of me that comes alive. And so questioning whether, does this mean I should go start my own thing? Does this mean I should? There's so many questions that it brings up in you. And which is part of the reason I'm really grateful for, post-college, me moving home. And because the Lord told me to, I didn't want to. I had my own name somewhere else.
Right. You'd already built
a
YouTube presence. You had this big channel that was blowing up. And,
yeah. Don't be the guy, Vince. Check it out.
We had an opportunity to move to California and blow, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. So we had all this, there's these things, but I felt a draw to come home. I felt the Lord called me home. And I didn't want to come home. No part of me wanted to come home. I was like, that's my dad's place. That's my mom's place. Like, everyone's the people there changed my diapers. There's familiarity. And the Lord said, I need you to go home. And so I went home, and I lived in my parents' basement. I lived in your basement. I said I would never do that, and I did it. It was very humbling. My first job in the ministry was ministry apprentice, which is basically do whatever anyone needs you to do.
Yeah. Pastor Lee was your supervisor.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. So ministry apprentice. And then from there, I did young adults ministry. So you said, hey, if you can get young adults going, get it going. So I started doing young adults, and my entrepreneurial spirit could build things. And I think that's one of the other hard parts, is that when you are fresh in your young 20s, you have all this ambition, you have all this creativity, and you don't have enough failures yet to realize that it's your optimism. Your optimism will be very, very high, which means you'll take risks and build things quickly. The thing that I didn't have yet, and that you may not have yet, is character. And so I've learned to be so appreciative of my 12 years now in ministry here, and staying the course, even when it was difficult for me and you to work together for.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, we'll get there. But I'm so grateful for my bake, because it's developed in me a fortitude of character that can sustain, and I'm settled now. And like who I'm supposed to be and all of that. So
I think one of the things Mom and I were really conscious of too is that it's common for pastors, their children to grow up, and sometimes they want to be in the ministry, and it's not unusual that ministers or pastors, senior leaders will put their children in roles in the church that are influential and authoritative way before they're ready. And it actually is not good, because it looks like, and is in some levels, nepotism. And it actually sets them up for failure, because people are like, oh, they're just putting them in there because they're their kids.
And they may be super talented too.
They may be very talented. And so we intentionally did the opposite, right? When you were hired, Pastor Lee Wilson said, I want to hire Jordan. And I said, I want to ask you this. Is he the best person for this job? Is there anyone else? I know he's my son, but take that aside. If he wasn't my son, would he be the person you hire? And he said, yes. I said, okay. And then when you went into children's ministry, right? Pastor Lee, didn't he transfer you over to take over the children's ministry at that point?
So small groups.
When you were moving forward, I asked my team, I didn't want to feel like I was pushing that on them. And I wasn't. I wanted it to happen organically. I wanted it to come out of your heart naturally, and I wanted the other leaders to see it and accomplish and affirm that. And it's been 12 years, and in the last 2 years, you've been actually on the role of an executive pastor here at the church. And really, in the last year, you've really stepped up and just been by my side, helping me and serving with me, really as an associate minister in the church. And it's been a long journey getting there.
Yep.
One of the things that I've observed, and I think you can speak to this, and I want you to, is that when you're raised in the church, and then you come back to the church you're raised in, everybody still sees you as the kid that they knew.
Oh, yeah.
So they don't necessarily see the maturity or the gifting or whatever. You in some ways, they want to treat you like the teenager.
Which could be a toxic cocktail.
So talk about that.
Yeah. Because you have something to prove. You're young and you have something to prove. You want to put your dent in the universe, if you will.
Right.
Or you make your mark, right? Because it's young people, that's what they got the energy. That's what it's for. Yet you're coming into a context, an environment where you're starting from a negative. Because there's not really, the familiarity breeds contempt.
Right.
And so, and because you are who you are at that point in your life, it can be very hard for you to get past that first hump of trying it, because you sometimes will try to prove things out of your own ego because you're trying to find out who you really are.
Right.
So I have like all the compassion in the world for my 23, 24, 25-year-old self, trying to figure out who I am in the context of ministry that my father's the lead pastor at, while dealing with the expectations of others or the whatever of others.
The boxes they keep you in.
Yeah. Oh, I've changed your diapers. Oh, this or that. You know, all these things. You're a chip off the old block, whatever it may be. And then trying to prove myself while at the same time, that's not helping myself. Because in the effort of trying to prove myself in my youthful ambition, I can dishonor certain people who have been there for a while.
Yeah.
But it's not coming from a place of trying to do that. It's coming from a place of saying, like, see me. That's really what it's trying to say.
Yeah.
See me, please see me. Like I had this whole world at my college where I was successful and I did these other things.
You're a campus leader.
In my own bubble. And I come home and I'm just the kid that left. And so now you're whether you're doing it purposely or not, you're just like, everyone wants to be seen. So you're like, see me, please. See me for being me, not just this kid, not just whatever, not just part of this family. And so out of that eagerness to be seen, you act in certain ways. That can be misinterpreted because of familiarity, or that can be accurate.
Yeah.
Accurate.
Sometimes you're right.
Yeah, like I look back at myself and I'm like, man, I was right in my own eyes a lot. And although I may have had a part of the truth, I didn't have the full truth because I didn't have the experience to really inform it. And, you know, I look back at myself, I see myself in meetings saying things in a way that I would, if I were seeing a young person now do that in a meeting, I would talk to them about that. And it would be a test for them to see if they could handle feedback.
Right.
So I have all the compassion in the world for people that are in that position because I walked it.
So let's talk a little bit about what did, and I want you to be completely straight.
Sure.
Right? As your father, and now you're in the church, and I have these hats I want to share. I want to talk about because the hat switching is what we've learned to do.
Yeah.
Right. So we wore this hat first and foremost.
My whole life. Yeah.
Right. I was dad first, always dad, and you observed me as a pastor, but in the home, I was just a father, right?
Yeah.
We had the family hat. And then...
Now, pause on that.
Yep.
Even in the home, though, in the family, ministry was always very present. You did your best to separate it. I will say that.
Yeah.
You always took us out, you know, you always put family first. But due to the nature of the work, and I'm seeing this now in my own family, right?
It isn't a 9 to 5.
It's very, very difficult to keep them as separate as you would like.
Very tough.
Very tough. Because when someone has a need, they have it. And you have to decide where the boundary lies in that moment. And sometimes that boundary is at the cost of your family. Sometimes it's the cost of the person. And so family, yes, it was always family first growing up. And I actually mean that. It really was. But the ministry, it was the other sibling.
Yeah, it's always there. It's always there.
It was the fourth brother, you know.
Yeah.
It was there. Me and him were twins. We were born at the same time.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it was,
Isn't that interesting?
so
That's a
it-
great analogy.
So it was always in the room, although yes. But I knew you mostly growing up. I didn't know the woes of ministry like I do now. I just knew it through you.
Right.
And what you experienced and how you came home.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about the second nature of our relationship, right? And that is,
Sheep. Yeah.
so now
This one.
when you came back, now I'm your father and your shepherd. Now, thank God we have a team of pastors here. And really, Pastor Lee, I always
Yeah.
said to you, don't feel like if it's difficult for you and confusing, Pastor Lee will be your pastor. Talk to him. And I told Lee, if when it comes to my son, if
Yep.
you be the pastor, I'll be the dad.
Yeah.
You tell me what I need to do
To the best of your ability.
to the best of our ability, right? So, but that complicates it because this is a spiritual relationship, right? And then when you go to work,
Yep. Yep. Employee.
now you're an employee,
Yep,
and
that's true.
I'm your boss,
Yep. Yep.
and it is different than the shepherd-sheep relationship
It is.
because this requires standards, accountability, right? And what can be difficult when you're working with family in ministry, and by the way, there's hats that aren't here, but it might be coworker, right?
More so now.
Right, right. But I'm talking about you may be like if one of your brothers was to come online, or your
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right.
Oh, I see
or
what
your
you're saying. Not
or your
between
aunt,
us.
your
Oh,
aunt,
yeah, yeah.
right? She
Uh-huh.
works here. She's a coworker and she's family. So those dynamics are always at play. And what we've observed, of course, and every pastor knows this, that the ministry invades the family life much more than the family life invades the ministry. It's always there. So what we talked about was switching hats, and I want you to talk about how you struggled with these different roles and how we had that conversation that helped us.
I struggle with it. And I think in some ways, even you and Mom struggle with it sometimes too.
Sure.
We all have to get used to a different, because also my brothers don't work with you.
Right.
So they have a level of relationship with you that I don't even have in the same way. It's different for them than me. So there's lots of little hats being switched all the time, especially when we're at the home. At work, it was more clear. But even at work, what's hard is, so if the boss or supervisor has something to say, feedback, it's hard to not translate that through the familiar relationship.
Yeah,
It's
is it
hard
dad
to-
speaking or is it the boss speaking?
Well, and it's hard, even calling you pastor, right? That's something I've had to work on doing in the workplace, not because of a streak of rebellion, although there could be some of that baked in there. I've called you dad my whole life. That's the primary way I've always known you and gone to you. And you weren't like an absent dad, you were a very present dad. So it was, so that's my first way of understanding who you are. Right. So then calling you pastor almost feels like that's not who he is. So somebody helped me understand at least that part of it. When they said, they talked about the office of the president, how they call him Mr. President. They address the office because that's who they're talking to. And so that helped me say, okay, I'm speaking to the office. When I'm speaking to the office,
Exactly.
he can respond in a concordance with the office and not like a father. So how I speak to that office also helps you determine how to speak to me.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and it was and I would say sometimes too, where it was difficult, and I would say pastors that have kids. This is one of the things that we have wrestled with, is that we'd be at the house, and you would start a lot of sentences with, "I don't want to talk shop," but then we start talking shop, and I'm there as a son in that moment. I'm not there so I'm there with my family, I'm there with my wife, I'm there with my kids. And so, but it can creep in so fast because we're all together. And what does a son want to talk to his dad about? The work of his hands.
Yep.
That's what fathers and sons want to talk about.
What they're doing.
What they're doing, what they're making, what they're creating. And what I'm creating happens to be in the same sphere and actually the thing that you manage. So so where we connect even, it had to change.
Right.
And that's, I think, one of the hardest parts, one of the hardest moments for me in my processing as an adult of learning how to do this right to where we've gotten now, which is so much better than where we've been, is working with a coach. You came up a lot, obviously. Parents come up a lot in counseling. So I was working with a coach, and there's expectations I had of you that I had to say goodbye to in a different way. I needed to rewrite the contract of my expectations of this relationship now as an adult. Because there's things, because you were a very present dad. So, you were like the superhero of my life growing up. And so now as an adult, I had to say, what does this mean now? Like, I work with him. There's, we're similarly gifted. It's the house that he shepherds, although I have a lot of ideas about how we could do things. How do we do this? And because of some of the crossing of the wires of these things, I was spinning. It was just difficult to know. And I remember we had a conversation once, which I don't know if you knew this was hurtful, but we had a conversation and you said, well, it's not hard for me. And I was like, well, good for you. I'm glad
I remember that conversation.
I'm glad it's not hard for you. But, so that made me feel like this big, when those kind of things happen.
Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah. So so I had to have this conversation. I had a conversation with my coach, and she walked me through a process of saying goodbye to the dad of my youth. That's not the dad I needed now. Because the dad I needed now is different because of what God's called me to individually, which is this house.
This is the first time you're sharing this with me.
Yeah, and these people. So I had to. Wow. So I was in my car in the parking lot of an Applebee's because I had to get out of my house from my screaming 2-year-old and 3-year-old at the time, and to have this conversation. And she walked me through a process of saying goodbye to the expectations that I needed of my youthful dad. Because that's not really what I need now. Right. In my own story. My brothers may need it differently. Yeah. But they don't have to do what I'm doing. Right. They're not, and I choose this. Like sometimes people say, well, you should just, I heard this all the time. Why don't you just go start a church? You don't have to deal with all that stuff. You're gifted enough. Go do it. Right. Go plant somewhere. There's times that was really tempting. I also know what it means to plant because I had a front row seat to it. So I knew that, but I never, you told me something that's always stuck with me. What's birthed in the flesh, you must maintain in the flesh. And I never felt any part of me that wanted to plant was my flesh. It was my ego. It was the part of me that said, I need to go make my own mark.
It wasn't a calling.
Well, that's the confusing part. I'm called to pastor. I felt that at least. Right. I'm called to preach the word. But the call to plant, the parts of me that wanted that were the parts of me that wanted to build my own thing apart from what God was doing. And so so I had to rebuild an understanding of what I need from you now. What I even need from mom now. My relationship with my mom has changed, as an adult. So I had to reconstruct the expectations that I had, because the difference between your expectations and your reality is disappointment. And you will find yourself spinning a lot if you don't properly place the people in your life in the right expectation box. And what you needed from somebody in one season will change in the next. And if you have the same expectations you had of somebody in this season that you had for them in a former season, you will find yourself constantly frustrated. I had to make peace with that.
This is excellent. And I just want to point out some things that I want pastors that are watching this or people in ministry that are working with family. This is really key. We wanted to do it right. And we didn't do it all right. Nobody will. But you had some lifelines. And we actually brought in counselors growing up when we had challenges. We brought in a counselor, a family counselor. At times you do family meetings. And you had the internal boldness to seek a coach, to seek a counselor, somebody that could advise and counsel you besides myself, right?
I needed it.
You needed it. And you did that on your own. And that was really helpful. And they helped you learn how to, and this is the term that we use, switch hats. And I think that's one of the key things when you have any kind of relationship that is multiple with anybody. You're a coworker and a friend. You're a husband and a coworker.
Yep.
You're, anything time you've got multiple layers of relationship, it gets complicated. And so you've got to learn what the hats are.
Yep.
And what we do now is basically, if you call me and you say, and we start talking, you say, Dad, work hat. First thing you say is work hat, which immediately I know, I go into the mode, okay, this is, I'm going to be interacting with him as pastor and boss, right? Or coworker. And we're not going to, I'm not dad right in this moment.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And then sometimes if we're talking and I just, you'll say to me, I just need you to be dad right now. I don't need, so when you, like you said, when you put on a hat and you say, this is my hat, or this is what I need you to be for me right now, it's incredibly helpful because it takes the emotional complications of multiple relationships and it simplifies it.
Yep. It takes both parties, though, to do that. And
it does.
this is easier said than done. But what is required to do this healthily is internal work. You had to do internal work.
Yeah, I did.
You've changed. I've had to do internal work in order to help put these it's like you're being like an electrician for your soul. You got to put the things in the right places, but they don't naturally happen that way. You have to rewire what is sometimes natural to be different.
Right.
And so my encouragement to you is that takes the most courageous work that you can do is work on you. The deep stuff, hugging the cactus of your heart, whatever that may be, however ugly it may be, whatever agreement that may mean, staring at the boogeyman of the soul and turning on the light.
Yep.
And because when I was doing that work, when I had this external person helping me see objectively things, that was the other thing. Who am I going to talk to around here? They're all influenced in some way by this ministry.
Right.
So I needed someone that was, she lives in Houston. Her name is Michelle Thompson. She's amazing. And I met with her on Zoom, and she helped give me perspective regularly about things that would bring me back to, so she helped me rewire the things and put them properly. So I built new internal habits as to how I would perceive reality.
Jordan, I can't say how proud I am of you as your father, but also as a minister. You're 35, you've been in ministry for 12 years, and you have intentionally gone after doing this work so you can be the best father, the best pastor, the best person you can be. And I think that's what's really key. And I hope that those who are watching and listening capture this. If you're stuck in some of these things, there is help, but you have to take initiative to deal with it. You got to go there.
If you're going to do this,
yep,
and it's going to be any kind of healthy, you have to. And it takes both parties, not just one.
Yep.
It takes both parties to make that work.
What advice would you give to senior pastors who either are employing their children or have their children in high-level leadership roles in the church, or are raising kids in the church? What advice would you give those pastors on how to set clear boundaries and cultivate their children's gifts without the complication of trying to micromanage God's process in their life? It's a long question.
There's a lot there. Advice I'd give pastors who are raising kids in ministry. Just want to be accurate, because there's a lot. There's a lot. One is, I think, helping them understand that their situation is not normal. I think that making that clear, even in a small church context, it's just not normal.
And that sounds really negative, but it's actually liberating when you realize the reason you feel different than everybody else is because you are different. Not necessarily more special, but your life is an unusual life, and most people can't relate to the life that you're living.
I would say another thing is be properly open about your humanity with them, and how to integrate your flesh with the expectations that people have of you to be dignified.
Mm.
And I think...
Talk about that.
Yeah.
Just a minute.
So I remember watching The Queen, the Netflix show, The Queen. In the very first episode, they sit down with the future Queen Elizabeth and they talk about there's two parts of this country. There's the dignified and the efficient.
Yes.
The prime minister is the efficient, the queen is dignified. And you will be the future. You're, as the queen, you're the dignified. So here's what that means. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, that's how ministry feels for me. That the prime minister doesn't have to be morally perfect. But the queen has to represent a moral standard to the people that she leads. Pastors are called to do something similar. But with the realities of your humanity, it can be very, very confusing. For kids, it can be super confusing. I see you. Just want you to know that. And so I think for parents to be open with their kids and non-judgmental about, like you said, you always told us this, and I really appreciate it. You said you can always bring anything to us. And when opportunities arose for us to do so, you did make it safe. Parents can say that, but it may not actually be safe. I think in addition to making that statement to your children, as parents, sometimes saying, I don't know, is important.
Mm.
I don't know. I actually don't know 100% about that. It helps them build an integrated experience of life instead of I'm either holy or I'm sinful.
Right.
And if I'm sinful, I got to hide and pretend like I'm holy, which only makes you worse.
Right.
And it makes you bitter. It makes you all these things and it makes you run away from God and church as soon as you get your own 2 feet. Or it'll get you involved with church.
Well, this is a whole podcast right here, just talking about this integration.
Or it'll get you involved in church for all the wrong reasons. And so, I would say helping integrate your humanity with your children, I think, is going to be really important. And then if they're in ministry with you, so that's growing up. If they're working with you in ministry, I think giving them an ear, giving your ear to them to hear them and understand and give them grace that they will say things that will likely be extreme because they're reacting. They're going to say things that this needs to change, burn this down, change this, change that, all the other things. There will be shreds of truth in it. Honor the truth while coaching the untruth. And I would say for parents, me as a son, we have to pass this test. This part's up to us. What you showed me was patience, and I appreciate that very much. Patience for me to say some knuckleheaded stuff, but still remain around, and you young ministers will say some very knuckleheaded stuff that older people roll their eyes at, and you'll say it's just because they're old, and it's not. It's because they know human condition. They've seen enough. So I would say that for you as the elders in the room, to not just roll your eyes though, because that will tear apart they'll turn away the hearts of the children from the hearts of the Father. But to understand where they're at and know that their context is different than yours, and that their human experience at that age is different than your experience at that age. And so just being a kind, present person, even in the midst of their things that you say they'll never work, and you know it because you've seen it a million times, giving them space to be authentically them in that moment, and offering a bit of empathy will go a long way, especially with this generation coming up, Gen Z in particular, who has experienced a lot of heartache at a very young age, and they've been exposed to things they should have never been exposed to much earlier, because as soon as the phone enters a child's life, it becomes the center of their life. And we didn't know any better until we know.
Right.
And so there's a group of people that have an operating system that's askew. And so if you just roll your eyes at them, you're not going to draw them any closer. So how do you lean into empathetically where they are and help them feel seen while coaching them to growth. And then for guys like me, I would say pay the price that character demands. There's a cost to being able to sustain yourself at high altitudes of calling. Your talents and your abilities can make you fly at high altitudes early, but your character is what will keep the bolts in place. And so being patient with the process that only comes with time and not removing yourself from a situation too early because your ego needs it, but sticking with it, because if you're in the ministry, it's not about you anyway.
Yeah.
It's not about your parents. It's
Say
not
it.
about any of that. If you're really called to ministry, if you want to build your kingdom, go do it in the corporate world. Don't do that to the church. If you
That
are
is so
called
good.
to the ministry, if you're called to the work of the shepherd, it's to make Jesus' name known. It's to his glory. So,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And there's a death that comes to self when you really surrender to the call.
that's the word. The operative word is surrender. You won't make as much money. You may not be known and be an influencer on social media. But if you're in it for the right reason, sorry.
It's all right. This is wisdom speaking.
God knows you and he sees you. And he's present with you in all of it. So if you're in it for the right reason, which is to God be the glory alone, it's not about you anyway. If you're in it to pastor and to care of the sheep,
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right.
Love. I'm really bad at crying and talking at the same time. I just feel the Spirit of God. Love them. That's what it's about. At the end of the day, it's not about a production. It's not about lights. It's not about more. That's Western thinking. It's about God has called you to the pastorate to take care of people, wherever they may be.
Yeah.
You know? And
That's it.
just to help them apprentice under Jesus. As you do so yourself. And so, Paul says that we should be ambitious to live a quiet life.
Yeah.
What's so funny about that is the word ambition and quiet life don't seem to go together.
Right.
Because usually if you have ambition, you're not looking to live a quiet life, you're living to look a famous one.
Yeah. Especially today.
Yeah, but our call is to, blessed are the meek.
Mm-hmm.
So I just challenge you, young pastor, make it about what's most important. And it will require a surrender and a death in you. But it's required for you to do this work and to stick with it. So, that's
Awesome.
it. Yeah.
Jordan, thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And thank you for blessing the pastors and the ministry leaders in the Shepherds Network. And, here at Abundant Life and here at the Shepherds Network, we're here to help pastors get the tools they need to thrive. And I really am excited about how God's going to use you in the lives, not only of the sheep that we're called to care for, but also the shepherds that God's called us to partner with and support and help. So thank you for your wisdom. And
This is great.
yeah, Why don't we take a minute and pray
Okay.
for our listeners and viewers? Father, in Jesus' name, I just thank you so much for this moment together today. Father, where we've been able to hear wisdom from you, we've been able to hear the challenges, and I pray that, Father, you'd help to continue to let the understanding and the light of understanding shine in the lives of pastors and family members who work together and serve together in ministry. I pray, Father, that you'd help us to do it right, do it better. And we know, Lord, that you call families. We know that Moses and Miriam and Aaron were siblings, and they were all called together, and they all served the Lord together. And we know, Father, that there were times that was done well, and there were times it wasn't done so well. And Father, the same is true with the family of Samuel and the family of David. And so, Father, I pray that you'd help our pastors who are raising kids to raise great kids who have their own sense of who they are and can hear what you've called them to do, whether it's in the church or not. And Father, I pray for families that are working together in ministry that you'd help them to learn how to switch hats. Yeah. And most importantly, Father, and maybe the most important thing we've talked about today, is that we would come back always to remember it's not about us. It's about you, Jesus, and the people you've called us to serve.
Yeah.
May we always put your body
Yep.
ahead of our ambition. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Shepherds Network podcast. Until we talk to you again, may the Lord abundantly bless you.
Thanks for joining us on the Shepherds Podcast. For more episodes and resources, you can check out our YouTube page or our website at theshepherdsnetwork.com.